Anyway,
My tires, last time I rode the bike, the tires were new. I put new Michelin's on it, and but I haven't really been on the thing to speak of for since that first try race over there. I think that was 2012. So I mean, I've ridden it a time or two. That's about it.
I,
So,
I, I kind of go up to Gerald's driveway
uh-huh.
and cross over there and come back down.
Yeah,
So it's 16 miles.
that's not a bad ride.
Yeah, and it's usually pretty good. It's just out of a clear blue there can be all kind of
Yeah,
stuff on
junk.
the berm,
Yeah.
and you think, where did this all come from? But that construction, where they're doing the light
Yeah.
poles and stuff. Last time I come down through, it was a little messed up.
Well, I'm gonna get my legs back under me a little bit, and then I might start hitting the highway. So
Well, I never plan on much. Bork just went down to Elkins, West Virginia, and rode. It's the tallest mountain in West Virginia,
huh,
and he
wow.
can still do that.
Huh.
Him and I forget the guy's name. The guy, that's who he rides with. The guy, he's kind of an off-wall guy. But I think he smokes a little marijuana. That bark me too.
Yeah, I tell you that Kurt McDonald used to be able to pull those
Oh
hills.
my.
Man, you get to a base of a hill and you think you're going strong. Hey, he just
Oh,
go
I
right on
know,
back.
I know. I mean, he's got his dad's lighter. He didn't marry, Sue didn't marry
Uh-huh.
his dad. But, one time we were riding the 104 and everything, I said, that guy has Kirk McDonald legs. He said, that's because I was his dad.
We came back. We were going Tosser at one time. Kurt was riding with us. He could have smoked us at any time. And we got in that hill section, there. And Kurt says, I got to take a leak. So he shot up some road. And I mean, when we were at the top of the hill, and I looked back, and he was still going up the road. I thought, well, we won't see him for a while. We didn't get more to the top of that hill on that ridge, and here he come flying up that hill and calls, hey guys, how the heck? And we were moving a pretty good clip. So.
Good morning, sunshine.
Good morning.
This song says, welcome to Father's house. On this beautiful Sunday morning, Lord has given us, we have no better place to be here in the house of the Lord. It's great to see each and every one of you. And welcome to everybody who is watching online today. I know that you're going to get a blessing on today's service. We've got a special speaker this morning. We're all been looking forward to hearing him. How many announcements we need to share?
I got one. We had a 5 o'clock meeting scheduled today for the disaffiliation group. We're going to postpone that, give it a gift of time for this afternoon. And our board meeting's next week, so we'll just talk about those things for next week. So bring any updates you have to the board meeting, and we'll talk about those next Sunday. Thank you.
Okay.
But we are having church tonight at 6, and we have a speaker, I believe, Mike Leslie.
One of our candidates, so everybody can come out and hear him tonight and get your input. We've got some other ones that will be lined up pretty shortly. We'd like for everybody to come out and listen to each one, so we get a good input. Benny. Just to be in each, we just kind of block that spot off somewhere, and let her mark it off. Look at her. First time back 2 or 3 weeks, and she's in trouble. Welcome. Good to see you, Dorothy. Okay. Anybody else got anything they need to share?
Get Jim to come Thursday and finish up our computer system. Hopefully it's streamlined and just give us a couple of weeks to make sure we got it down. But thanks to all those who donated and
Good.
appreciate it.
So we're praying that we're up and going good. Everybody be able to see me out there. Hello. All right. Time for me.
Good drop.
Huh? Ah, boy. Now I lost track. Birthdays, anniversaries this week. Me. I'm the baby bunch, right, man? 25 years ago. Don't seem like it's been that long.
Congratulations. Okay. Special bulletin this week. Nobody. Okay. If not, let's all stand. Our acolytes are ready. And love lift to me. Welcome to God's house.
I will sing. Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. The third day he arose from the dead. He ascended into heaven, and sitteth at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.
You may be seated.
Time for our gifts and offerings. May I have our ushers, please?
We'll be standing now for our doxology.
Heavenly Father, thank you for a beautiful day, the opportunity to come to thy house to worship you, Heavenly Father. Thank you for the church and church family. Thank you for this small amount that we can give back to you to help keep your work on, Heavenly Father. We ask that you be with our church as we go through this change of these favors for the rest of Christ's name.
Man, you may be seated. Praise time, folks. What a beautiful morning. We're here in the house of the Lord. Who will have a praise that they will share? Dorothy.
I just want to thank everyone for their love, the prayers, the cards, the calls. I really felt it because it's been a rough month.
Yeah. Yep. Happy to see you back. Someone else this morning. Hot in here. Got you quiet.
I want to praise God. He's really has blessed both Teresa and I this week.
Great.
It's amazing what he is teaching us. Watch out.
It's good, Charles.
It's nice to have Miss Perry with us this morning and some other people we haven't seen for a while. See Paul back there. It's good to have everybody back.
That's right.
It's good to see Tom out. It's good to see Tom.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
One to keep
Good. Thank you.
My son Gary's mother-in-law, Betty Carter, she had a couple of tumors removed from her lung, sweet cancers.
Have any prayer requests you'd like to lift up loud this morning?
Sharon and Marie Deanna are sick. Remember them. Amanda and her family are traveling.
Okay. I'll miss everybody back there.
Remember Pete and Sis?
Pete and Sis.
The Loudback family.
Yes.
We start school this week over in Ohio. Grace starts her senior year, so but and then also my uncle died Friday, the Ned Moran family.
Pray for the people in Hawaii.
In Hawaii? Yes. Terrible.
Remember Miss Georgia, that she's doing an outstanding job today. It is kind of nerve-wracking, but she'll be fine. And just remember our church.
Continue keeping Betty Collier in the prayers.
Miss Betty. Yes.
Remember Kenny. Kenny's home sick today.
Okay.
Lainey's been having bad allergies, and I'm hoping I don't have to put her on a third round of antibiotics, so if you guys can pray for her. But also Lizzie too, she'll start kindergarten, not this week, but next week, so.
Remember Caden's friend, Brady Blevins. He plays football with Caden, but he's having some health issues, and he's gonna go to the doctor this week to determine if he can play football or not. So just remember him, he's a doctor.
Good. We have a lot.
I have a praise and a prayer request. December of 2021, when all of those floods went through eastern Kentucky, we had taken up a love offering and sent it to a church, Neon United Methodist, down there. And they sent us, it was actually a few weeks ago, but I can never remember. But they sent us a message on Facebook to a video that just kind of showed what it looked like before and after. And so, praise God, they've been able to rebuild what they had, and they once again thanked us and said it was because of us that they were able to do so much. But continued prayers for everything that is still going on down there, and that everyone is able to recover from all that flooding. So,
Good.
I don't know who took the picture of of our church with the rainbow over it. That was
That's pretty, wasn't it?
a lovely picture. I don't do Facebook, but my daughter does, and she saw the picture, and she sent it to me, and it just lifted my spirits unbelievably.
Yeah.
I just felt like God was there, watching over our church. It's a beautiful picture.
Yep, that was a neat picture. That's right. God is watching over us. He's being good to us. Remember our prayer list. As you pray this week, today, remember all these folks. We have a lot of them, and it's kind of easy to maybe not follow through the way we should in our prayers, but let's try and remember them all.
Also remember R.J. Hanna. Kenny and I ran into him this week, and he has a wonderful testimony. And, he's the fellow that got hurt in the motorcycle accident and injured his arm and hand. And at times, not all the time, just whenever the nerves decide to act up, he's having horrendous pain in his hand. And anyway, it'll be
We have any unspoken requests this morning? We sure do.
I have a couple requests. Linda Daniel, lady I work with, is having shoulder surgery, remember her? And a gentleman that I asked for us to pray for a while back, Greg Call, who had cancer. Well, he went and was cleared, and then he started having trouble again, and now it's back, so please remember him.
Yeah. Let's all stand. Gerald's going to be our prayer leader this morning. The altar is open, folks. Feel free to come forward.
It's a real shame that Mr. Fox is not here this morning. He could see me blubber in person. And Phil played this song that he plays pretty regularly. This is Father's house. You are welcome here. And I feel so welcome and loved here. But even more important, our Father said, wherever two or more of us are gathered together, He is there. Amen. And He is here this morning. Let's pray. Father in heaven, all these loving, wonderful requests that have been lifted up to you this morning, I believe you have heard every one, and that you will, in your will, make every situation exactly as it should be. We can't praise you enough for all the things that you do in our lives. We ask a special blessing on this church, that we can continue to be a shining light in this community. We'll say the prayer that you taught your disciples to sing. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
I forgot one thing this morning, and I don't want Betty to whip me when she sees me. But you've seen in your bulletin that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks with the disaffiliation. On the back, they're asking if you want to be a member of the Sunshine Community Church. Fill this out, and so we'll have everything on record. And you can lay it here on the altar, lay it there in the back, what you want to do. But now I'm going to turn the services over to a lady we've been waiting here for a while. And can't wait to see what Miss Georgia has to bring us this morning. So.
You may be sorry. Yeah, I might not walk right in front of it. So music Purtee. Oops.
That's why I didn't turn it on yet.
Didn't know you were going to get a floor show too, did you?
This is making for great material on YouTube.
Oh, please.
How many Kentuckians does it take to get Georgia set up?
We might take it over.
My legs don't work well. My muscles are there, but my mouth still works. So
Let me get your mic turned on.
okay.
All right.
Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Hot dog. Today I wanted to talk to you about a couple of different things. The first thing I want to tell you is I am a storyteller and a preacher. I mean, I'm a storyteller, not a preacher. I am a teacher. And therefore, my message today is going to be more of a testimony than a sermon. So, my testimony, I want to show you how God worked in my life. I'm going to show you, I didn't even realize. Matthew 19:26 says that with God all things are possible. It doesn't say some things are possible, or what you want to happen is possible. He says all things are possible with God. So, I want to talk to you, and being a storyteller, a lot of my message today is going to be in stories. So the first thing I want to tell you about, I'm going to bring the teacher out here for a minute and tell you the word story is not a synonym for lie. Stories are for, quite a bit of them are for entertainment. Like you watch these movies on television, you read a fiction book, you hear a fairy story or a legend. These stories are mainly for entertainment. Then there are stories that are just pure lie. There's not a word truth in it. That's usually for entertainment too. So it isn't really considered a lie because you're not bringing a false witness on anybody. You're simply entertaining. And most of these things, the people know ahead of time. If you know ahead of time that this is made up, then there's nothing wrong with it. So you're thinking, well, ha 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 ha, good. So the stories that I'm going to tell you today, I will tell you, are sort of like parables. In that parables, the Lord's parables, were entertaining to start with, to grab the attention of the people. But then he had a message, and the message was at the end. And I wrote down the scripture that was in, but I can't find it. Anyway, it's Matthew 19, I believe it is, where he says, my memory gets me, people. And the disciples asked him, said, Lord, why do you tell so many stories? Why do you tell so many parables? And he said, because I want them to understand. So he talked to his audience, the audience that he had. Let's take the story of the prodigal son. He's talking to a group of thousands of people. They're not all the same kind of people, but he wants all of them to understand. He says that there are people in that crowd. He tells his disciples, there are people here who look, but they don't really see. They hear, but they don't really listen. They don't understand. So I have to grab their attention. And the parable of the prodigal son is really three stories. The first one, he talks about the shepherd who had 100 sheep. He lost one. He leaves these other 99 and goes to look for the one. When he finds it and brings it back, he calls everybody in and they have a big celebration. Now the shepherds who were in the group all understood this. They know that what he was talking about. So then he gets to the middle class, I guess you would call them, and he talks about a woman who had 10 pieces of silver. She lost one. And then he explains that she moved the furniture, she swept the floors, she took everything out, she looked everywhere she could possibly look, and she finally found that one piece of silver. She was so pleased that she called everybody in and they had a big celebration. So then we get to, he's talking to the Pharisees and the scribes. These are the people who are the hardest to get to. And he starts telling them about the prodigal son. This, I'm sure you all know the parable, but I'll paraphrase it for you. This one son, the younger son, comes to tell his very wealthy father, who owns a large farm, he tells him, I don't like to be here. I don't want to be here with this stuff. He says, give me my part of your inheritance, or my inheritance from you, and just let me go. The father didn't argue with him. He said, okay. He brought out a bag of all of his inheritance, his money, gave it to the boy, and the boy left. He walked down the road. The man, of course, was sad, but he thought, well, you know, that's what he wants. The boy who took the inheritance got into every kind of debauchery you could think of. He drank too much, he gambled too much, he did things with women that he shouldn't have done. He was just a horrible, horrible person, and he ran out of money. Now what was he going to do? He needed to find a way to live. He couldn't even find any food. He was starving. He finally got in with some Gentiles and got a job with the pigs. Now, people, to a Jew, being around pigs is a bad thing. They don't want to be with them, they don't want to touch them, they don't eat them, they don't feed them, they don't anything. Anything to be around pigs is against their religion. But this boy, even though he was a Jew, he was starving. He had to have a job. So he took a job given to him by this Gentile to work with the pigs. He is getting filthy. He feels bad because he knows he shouldn't be with the pigs. He is starving. He gets so low that he wants to eat the stuff that the pigs are eating. And he stops and thinks to himself, you know, I could go live with my father on his farm and be a servant and live better than this. So here he goes. He ragged clothes, dirty body, no shoes, stringy hair, and he's dragging himself home. His father, who looked for him every day, he knew he was coming back home. He just knew it in his heart. And he kept watching for this boy. He saw him, and he runs to him and immediately gives him a new cloak and new shoes and a ring for his finger and says, kill the fatted calf and let's have a celebration. And they start celebrating. Now the older son is out on the fields working, and he hears all this celebration going on. And he says, what's going on? And he asks one of the servants, he says, what is going on? What's the celebration about? And they said, your brother is back from the dead. And he says, what? And he becomes very, very angry when he finds out what all that his father had given the boy. And he said to his father, he said, Father, why are you doing so much for my brother? He left you. He took your money and he left and has given you nothing. And I have worked this entire time on this farm for very little, and you didn't even give me a goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. Why? And his father said, because you have been here to enjoy the goods that we've had all this time. But he has come back, and we have to accept him back, and he will now join us and enjoy the fruits of our labors. So I took that to mean that all three of those parables told to different people, different stories, but they have a meaning. They all have the same meaning. God welcomes a sinner back to the fold as much as or more than the people he already have in heaven with him. And I thought that was strange, but then I get to thinking, the people in heaven are there, they have, or the people who are Christians, they are getting what they need from God. They've been getting what they need from God. This boy has just found it. He needs to be celebrated and brought into the fold. So, that is a teaching story. A teaching story is, like I said, information at the beginning, and then finally explaining it, the point at the end. So a lot of my stories, although I can't complain or can't compete with the parables of God, I'm just telling, a lot of my stories are going to be teaching stories. But there's one kind of story that I haven't explained to you that is all, it's just all entertainment. It's a lie. I mean, the whole thing's a lie. You know it's a lie to start with. I wrote a poem about that, and I'll read that poem to you for just a minute. So just listen carefully. It says, I want to tell you all a story about me and my old dog True. Bestest dog I ever had. Did what I told him to. Wherever I walked around the farm, old True was close behind. We'd rabbit hunt and possum hunt, or hunt anything we could find. Our favorite trip was up the hill in the cow pasture by the creek. We'd go up that hill and down again at least 3 times a week. One day when I went up the hill, as always, True followed me. But while we were gone, old farmhand Bill just happened to plant a tree. As always, we ran down the hill, me and old dog True. I missed, but True, he hit that tree and split himself right in two. Now, I love that dog, and it broke my heart to see him split in two. So I picked up the parts and taped them together to fix my old dog True. The surprise of it all was old True got well. From tail right to the crown. The only problem we had at all was I put part of him on upside down. Then poor old True found it hard to walk. With 2 legs on his top, he'd move 2 legs and on the bottom, and then he'd just flip-flop. Poor old True. I still love that dog. Now, you know from the beginning, that story's a lie. There's none of that is true. First of all, I probably couldn't climb that hill right now. But anyway, but that's the other kind of story. Then there's a story of these stories that I was telling, the teaching stories. They have a basis of truth. Now I have to remind you that my stories take place, well, I think the first one takes place in probably 1950, 49. I was 5 years old. I can't remember all that. I remember the basis of these stories, the true part of the stories, but in order to make them interesting, I had a few other little details. Now, Floretta always gets on to me for that, but, you know, and I've told her that if I say something I shouldn't say, she's supposed to sit back there and go. She probably won't. She'll just give me that Floretta look. But, and of course, Troy told me he was going to go to sleep during this, and I told him if he did and snored, I was going to yell at him, so. Anyway, the first part of my stories is I went to live with my mom and dad when I was 5 years old. We lived in an alley house in between 11th Street and 12th Street. And I was a large child. I know that's hard for you people to believe, but I was, I was the same size as my mom. We were the same size jeans when I was in the first grade. I started out extremely large. I weighed almost 15 pounds when I was born. And so I'm told. I was there, but I don't remember. But I continued to grow larger and larger. And when my father later on when he would take me to the movies or someplace, he carried my birth certificate with him so I could get in for underage. Anyway, my father tells the story, or used to tell the story, of sometime 2 or 3 times a week when I first went to live with them. After we'd played all day, I would get my friends together, make them sit down in front of me, and then I would get a book with pictures in it, and I would read that book to them and make them listen. Now the problem with that is, I was 5 years old, I had never been to school, I didn't know what a teacher was, and I couldn't read. So I made every bit of it up out of just from the pictures and what I thought they were saying. And he said I would do the voices like the duck said, all this stuff, and have them listen. Well, my father explained to me that a teacher makes the kids sit down and listen. So from that time on, I wanted to be a teacher. I was going to be a teacher. I was going to have people sit down and listen to me when I talked. I was going to teach. No matter what they asked me, anybody asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, I was going to be a teacher. I told people that didn't even want to know I was going to be a teacher. I knew I was going to be a teacher. And once I started school, that was it. I was going to be a teacher no matter what. Well, the next story takes place when I was 17 years old. Long time in there. But when I was 17 years old, and I was in college prep classes in high school, at that time, if you were in college prep classes, you had to take an aptitude test. Well, I thought that was dumb because I knew I was going to be a teacher. I didn't need to know what my aptitude was. But we spent, each one of us, by the way, I need to tell you that there were only 46 in my class, so it didn't take very long to go through these. But everyone that was in college prep had to take the aptitude test. So I was sent down for my day of aptitudeness. And the guy sits there in front of me, and he brings out these pegboards with the square pegs and the square holes and the round pegs and the round holes. And I thought, well, this is dumb. Anybody could do this. I didn't say that, but I'm sure I had the look on my face because he gave me one of those looks. He said, now, this is to test your agility. And I thought, I don't have any agility. But I did it. But I didn't realize he was timing me, and I just picked one up and just taking my time. Okay, the next thing we did, we discussed a little literature. We did a little math, which I hated. We just did discuss different things, and I thought, well, this is easy. How's he going to tell what I'm going to be able to do? I can talk. So the last thing he did, he wanted to talk about my family. And he asked me where my father worked and if I had any siblings, and did my mother work and things like that. And where did I live? And I said, okay. So anyway, it took all day. This things he was testing for my aptitude. About a week later, a different man comes in, and he calls each one of us in separately to go over our tests. And so he brings out the pamphlet for my test, and he said, you're Georgia Dodd? I said, yes, I am. And he said, well, I have your test results. And I said, well, really, it doesn't matter because I'm going to be a teacher. And he goes, no! And I thought, whoa, what? Why? He said, you could never be a teacher. No. Why? He said, first of all, you're too tall. At that time, I was the tallest person in my high school. And he said, you're too tall, you're too big, you've got muscles, because I had to work. You have muscles, and I did, they've since left me, but I had muscles. And he said, you're too loud, you talk too loud, you laugh too much, you're never serious, children must have somber, sincere teachers, or they won't learn anything. And I said, well, I'm going to be a teacher. He says, no, you can't be a teacher. I said, I can be a teacher. And he said, well, even if you made it through all that stuff and somebody hired you, you couldn't go to college. Your father works at Detroit Steel. You have siblings. Your mother doesn't work. They have all kinds of bills, I'm sure. There's no way he could afford for you to go to college. And I started thinking, well, he said, it would hurt the rest of your family if they take the money to send you to college. And I was heartbroken. I was ready to cry. I thought, I can't be a teacher if I can't go to college. So I was upset. When I went home, I told my mom and dad at supper. We always had discussions at supper. Every supper we always ate together. And Dad says, what's the matter with you today? And I told him what the man had said. He was furious. Oh, he was furious at what the man had said. He said, listen. He said, you want to be a teacher? You be a teacher. If you want to go to college, we'll see you get to go to college. He said, but I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. He says, you get you some jobs, part-time, whatever, to get some life experience. Because he said, you've been sheltered here at home, and you haven't dealt with the outside world very much. He said, you get you some jobs, and you go to college, and you start learning about being a teacher. He said, when you get to your senior year, if you want to switch to some other job, that's fine. You'll have plenty of credits that you can change. If you don't, you still want to be a teacher, you're almost there. I said, okay. So I started getting jobs. My first job, I worked for a little Jewish German lady who I don't know this for sure, but I think she was lived through the Holocaust. She was an escapee because Mrs. Kessler, I don't know, Lana may know the name, but Mrs. Kessler, she had a little dry goods store, and she was the only one in there. You hardly ever saw anybody in there. But she liked to speak German with my dad, who spoke idiomatic German, but he spoke a little bit, and she liked to talk to him. And she said, you have a daughter, don't you? And he said, yes. And she said, well, I could use a little help. He said, you send your daughter down to help me. So that was my first job. Now the problem with this job is nothing in that place, that whole store, had a price tag on it. Nothing. She says, you watch me. So this man comes in and he says to her, he says, I want to buy a pair of jeans. And she says, okay. And she goes over and she starts showing me these jeans and picks out his size and all like that. And he said, how much? She said, well, the prices I'm sure are not right because that was a long time ago. But she said, $12. And he said, okay. And he gave her the $12, took the jeans and walked out. So the next man that came in, she says, you do this one. So I go over and I help the man find his size jeans, and I'm just so proud of myself. I think, man, this is great. And I handed him the jeans and he says, how much? And I said, $12. She jumped out of her chair. She came running toward me going, 999, up to Liberbot, 99. No, $9? What do I do? And what she was saying was, no, no, no. God in heaven, no. And I thought, what'd I do? And she said, told the man, she says, she doesn't know, she's new, it's the sale. You get them for $8. So he bought the jeans and went out. And I said, Mrs. Kessler, I don't understand what happened. She said, the first man, she says, these are regular customers. She says, I only have regular customers. And she says, this man, first man came in, he works at Detroit Steel, he's single, he has his own house, he has new cars, he could afford $12 jeans. So he's paid $12. She said, the next man comes in, she says, I know him well. He has 3 children, he works at Detroit Steel, he has a wife, he has lots of bills, drives an old rattle trap, he could only afford $8. And I thought, how am I supposed to know this? So she looked at me, she says, well, you go to the store and get my groceries. So I got her groceries. I lasted a day and a half in that job. I told my dad, I said, I don't think that's for me. So my next job, I was in a restaurant, and this guy comes over and he says, we're looking for a waitress. Do you want the job? And I said, sure, why not? Well, I worked from 7 o'clock in the evening till 3 o'clock in the morning. I got all the drunks. I got 75 cents an hour. Big wages. And he took $1.50 out for my lunch every day. I said, but I don't eat lunch. He said, you're paying for it anyway. So, buddy, I ate. Anyway, I worked hard. I loved it. I mean, the guys, they were mostly men that came in at that time of the evening and night. Most of them were 3 sheets in the wind. And they didn't know what they were doing. But, you know, they ate. They got to feeling better. They drank a pot or two of coffee. And then they went home. The police came in. I talked to them. I really loved it. I loved being a waitress. I worked there about a month, and the guy that owned the place, he was a short man with a big pot belly, bald. And that's the way I remember him. I'm sure he didn't look maybe that ugly. But anyway, he was not, you know, he was no Adonis. So he said, will you go back in the back room and get a case of something or other for out front? I went in to get it, and when I finish these, I was washing the benches down. I said, I'll finish these and then I'll go back and get it. So I went back to get it, and he was back there, and he grabbed me, and, well, it wasn't very nice. And I pushed him away and laughed at him. I said, silly thing, and laughed, and walked out. Well, I got fired that night. Supposedly because the cash register was short 75 cents. A whole hour's wages. But anyway, I got fired. And I thought, well, I learned a lot. So I learned how to deal with people. I learned how to talk to people. I learned how restaurants are run. I mean, I learned a lot of stuff in that thing. I knew I loved being a waitress, but I thought, no, not full time. It's too hard. And I don't want to be a waitress. So I get a message from a friend who was had been working for the YMCA, and she said, you know, they're looking for somebody to be a manager for the playgrounds here in New Boston. So I said, well, I'll just check. And I checked, and I got the job. I was working with children on playgrounds every day. This was for 5 weeks. I love this. I really enjoyed this. And you know, I learned I could deal with children. They weren't afraid of me. We had a good time, but I also taught them something. So I thought, yeah, I can do this. I can be a teacher, I think. But that job was finished too. Now I'm not going to go through all of my jobs, believe it or not. But I will tell you 2 more. The first one is I was in Fashion Bug Plus looking to buy some new clothes, and they asked me to model for them for this model thing that was coming up. So I said, sure, I can do that. So I modeled clothes for Fashion Bug Plus for a while, and the lady came out and she says, brought a bathing suit, and she says, today you will model this bathing suit. And I said, no. She said, yes, you have to model this bathing suit. I said, no. She said, why not? I said, ma'am, if you want to sell that bathing suit, you don't want me to model it. And she said, and why not? She says, you have a good figure. And believe it or not, I used to have. And she said, you can model this. I said, ma'am, I am so knock-kneed. My knees knock against each other when I walk. I look like an X. You don't want me walking X across that stage with a bathing suit on. I said, you bring a cowboy with bow legs beside me, we spell the word ox. I do not want that. So what happens? I lost that job. So, but I learned. You have to stand up for what you believe in. So the last job that I had was really the most fun. But I was a country music singer and comedian. We traveled shows. We did shows all over the place. We did a television show or two. Now remember, this was probably, well, this was in 1961 and 62, a few years ago. But we did shows at lodges, high schools, anybody that wanted a show, we'd do a show, you know. And we had a whole group of us. The best thing about that job was I met my husband-to-be. And we were married for 52 years, so I guess it took. But he played electric harmonica. So we traveled all over the place. Well, I opened for people that you young people will never have heard of, but some of the older ones may have heard of Little Jimmy Dickens and the Stanley Brothers and Bobby Bear and George Jones. And I did shows to open up for them when they did their show. And I'll tell you about that one and how I lost that job sometime, but not tonight. Anyway, I lost that job. I was with them for the summer. We did the county fairs and so forth. So when I lost that job, I thought, what did I learn from this job? Well, I learned that people are alike. I learned I love being on stage and in front of people. It didn't bother me to speak or to sing or tell jokes or tell a story in front of people. Sometimes the joke landed, sometimes it didn't. But I also learned you don't play pranks on the main star of the show, even when the manager tells you to. And that didn't work too well with George Jones. Anyway, I realized about this time, none of those jobs did I go out looking for. They found me. And every one of them, I worked only long enough to learn something from it. And I remembered our minister at church saying, you know, the Lord puts you in certain places where you need to be. And he teaches to you that you can do anything with God in your pocket, in your life. And with God, all things are possible. So I got to thinking, well, sure, I can become a teacher. And I kept making myself believe it until I became a teacher. And you know, the day I became a teacher was probably the happiest day of my life. Because I had worked for it so hard and so long. I was going to be a teacher, and I knew it. So my teaching life went by 30 years. I say 30 years, it was only 29 and a half, but that last half year I substituted, so I figure it's 30 years. And the half year I substituted was probably harder than the other 29 and a half. That's a hard job. So I realized that teaching could be fun. I taught at Sunshine right up here. I taught at Argolite. I taught at McKell Elementary. I couldn't stay in one place too long. They kept moving me. But, I started, the children, or people in here who were my students, some of them will remember that I used to start classes with a story. And the story, like for example, when we were starting our bones, to learn the bones, I told them a story about a boy who takes a girl on a date, and he puts his tibia and fibula and humerus around her scapula, and puts his hand on her humerus, and then he puts his maxilla against her mandible. And oh my, the kids, their eyes are getting bigger and bigger, you know. And I said, and then she took her phalanges and laid them beside his maxilla and mandible. And they said, what's that mean? I said, you're going to find out. And the first person who can tell me what I said, I'll give you 5 extra points. Buddy, they studied those bones, stood on their desk to say the bones, learn the bones, and one boy said, you know, I thought this was going to be a dirty story. And he explained explained to me what it said. I said, that's exactly right. And he said, shoot. When we were going to study genetics, I got up in front of the class and I said, now, boys and girls, I'm going to tell you a story. And they didn't know whether to go yay or I said, there once was a boy who was born who had problems. I said, he could only go, And he thought, oh, as he grew up, he didn't get any better. And he thought, I'll never have a girlfriend. But one day he met a girl who went, And he went, And they got married. And they had a baby. And that baby went, So, and they asked me, now you people, you adults that know I had your children, they said, what does that mean? I said, you're going to find out. So they learned that you get half from your parents, or half from your mother, and half from your father, and maybe a little bit from an ancestor way back. But that was, we did have fun in my classes. I told stories for discipline. I said, you behave yourselves, and before we go home, I'll tell you a story. Or I told stories for, as I said, to start the teaching, to explain, to get their attention. Now those stories were sort of true, and they sort of had meaning, but it got their attention, and we enjoyed ourselves. So that was my teaching life, and that's, I honestly believe to this day that the reason I finally became a teacher was God led me through every step of the way. He put the jobs in front of me that I needed to learn. He gave me the stamina and the adrenaline and I don't know what else to get through, and so that I could become a teacher. And then comes the other part of my life, the traveling part. I love to travel. I absolutely love to travel. I'd keep a suitcase if they'd let me, and somebody say, let's go someplace, I'd say, let's go. Of course, we couldn't do that. Couldn't travel much because, to begin with, because my husband was not in shape. And then when he got better, we traveled, and it wasn't easy. We didn't have a lot of money because he couldn't work. But we would skimp and save the whole year so that we would have enough to travel on. We would stay in, some of the most awful motels you ever saw in your life. We stayed in one where the bed had to go up against the door and in front of the bathroom. So if you had to go to the bathroom during the night, you had to jump over the bed. We stayed in one that John said was so scary that he sat up all night with a chair against the door while I slept because I was going to be the driver. I mean, but they were cheap, you know. We paid $4, $5, $8, and we did all of our own cooking. We cooked in the middle of a chain gang one time. Just all kinds of places. I could tell that some other time. I got to get back on the story. But the traveling part, as I said, it wasn't easy. I had to help John get dressed every morning. I had to wrap his legs so that he could walk and get around. I wrapped him with elastic bandage all the way from the toes up to the knees. He couldn't bend over well, so I had to pull his britches up and all that stuff. So one day we were leaving. I hate traffic. I hate big towns with lots of traffic. We were going to have to go through St. Louis on the way home. St. Louis, oh gosh, is awful. So I told John, I said, we're going to go through early in the morning. I said, let's get up about 4 o'clock and we'll go through very little traffic. He said, okay. So we get up at 4 o'clock, we pack our bags, and I take a suitcase out to the car, and all he has is his overnight case full of his medicine and his chewing tobacco. And so we get started out the door, and I'm going, shh, John, be careful, be quiet. Shh, we don't want to wake anybody up. Shh. He said, okay. Missed the next step, fell, and screamed, and his overnight case went clear across the parking lot. So I'm out there with a flashlight finding the stuff in in his overnight case. We get in the car and we start out. We're going down the road, and I'd say about 5 miles, that's a guess, from the internal part of St. Louis, my windshield started getting fogged up. And I thought, well, it's not foggy outside, it's a clear night, what's going on? So I turned the defroster on. It didn't work, nothing, it didn't take care of anything. So I put the windshield wipers on, thinking it was something on my window. Didn't do a thing. Finally, John says, here's a roadside rest, let's pull in there and see what you can do. So we pull in, I take a cloth, and I'm trying to wipe it off. It won't go off. It's like there's a film on there, but nothing will come off. I poured water on the cloth and tried to wipe it off. It wouldn't wipe off. So we're sitting there, and I'm saying, well, I don't know how we're going to get any place if this windshield doesn't straighten up. I said, so we sat there for a couple of minutes, and all of a sudden, it cleared up on its own. So we thought, what in the world? Well, we get started. We go the few miles on into St. Louis, and about 5 minutes before, a huge semi had a jackknife over the road, and we would have been right there. God is where puts you where He wants you to be. You just have to listen. Another time, we're coming out of Capitol Reef National Park in Utah, and it's a beautiful place, but the roads are just 2-lane highways through there, and you go through a lot of country. It's very just picturesque, you know. And we're traveling along, going out of the park, and John sees a barn. Now, my husband is an artist, and he loved to paint barns. So he saw this barn over there with daisies all around it. It was beautiful, you know, and he goes, stop! I slammed on the brakes and said, what's the matter? He said, look at that barn. Get out and take a picture of it. So I get out, take a picture of the barn. And I come back, we look at the picture, and he looks to make sure that it's the right angle, you know, taking this and that. I guess we spent about 6 or 7 minutes, maybe 10. And so then he says, okay, let's go. So we're going, we'll get out through there, and we feel something. It's like an earthquake. And then it stopped. And I said, what in the world was that? We went around a small curve, and there was this huge boulder, probably about 2 or 3 tons, had fallen off the mountainside right onto the middle of the road. We could have been in that. God had us where He wanted us to be. Now the best one, and those, by the way, those are all true. But this last one, I have to add a little bit into it to make it a little bit entertaining. And Floretta's going to sit back there and say, that's about 70% true, which is what she always tells me. But it is partly true. So we're driving along. Floretta and I were on our way to Carson City that night, Carson City, Nevada. We were going to Sacramento, California, to visit my aunt and uncle. And we're driving on the Wind River Indian Reservation. Beautiful place. It's just absolutely gorgeous. But it's kind of desolate. There are no houses around that you can see. There's almost nothing. Just road and scenery at the time. It's probably built up now. But this was, I don't know, 30 years ago, maybe 40. Time doesn't mean a thing to us young people. But it's, we're traveling along, and I said, I'm getting kind of hungry. Floretta said, well, I am too. And I said, well, I need gasoline. Let's stop. And we saw a building up there. It had a big sign that said General Store. So we stopped to see if we could get us a sandwich. And there was no cars around it. There were no cars at all around that building. But it said open, so we went in. And there was a line. The minute you got in the door, there was a line all the way back through the store. One right behind the other. And I said, and this is true. I said, what in the world's going on? I didn't see any cars out there. I asked this man, I said, there are no cars outside. How'd you all get here? what are you doing here? And he said, oh, he said, Charlie just built him a new bathroom and we all came by to see it. Now, I don't know if he was pulling my leg or not, but they were lined up to go to the bathroom. So, we couldn't get a sandwich, or maybe that was the place we got the sandwich. Anyway, yeah, we went over to get the sandwich, and there was a boy sitting there, and he's big overalls and, just sitting there looking at a comic book. And he was, I call him a boy, he was probably in his 20s. But he was, I don't know the politically correct term nowadays, but he was kind of slow. Maybe that'll be all right. He was, and I said, I was looking in the deli part, and I said, I'd like to get a couple of sandwiches, please. And the boy looked at me and he says, can't. And I said, why? Looks like you have plenty of food. And he said, ain't certified. I said, what? He said, ain't certified. And I said, but I just want a sandwich. I said, there's some ham and bread, just put them together and hand them to me. Can't, ain't certified. Daisy certified, she'll be here soon. And I said, I'm standing there going, what? So finally here comes Daisy. And she said, could I help you, ma'am? I said, well, yes, I wanted a couple of sandwiches. And I said, the boy there, he said he couldn't do it. She said, oh, no, he's not certified. And I said, I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't understand what that means. So she explained it to me. She sent him off so he would do something, so he wouldn't know. Explained to me that the health department, when they came, he was behind the counter looking at his books, and she said, the woman from the health department said, he can't make any sandwiches. She said, just look at him. She said, he's not clean. He doesn't look like he could handle anything. She said, he is not to touch any sandwiches. She said, and about the time he came back, she said, I will certify you and only you to make sandwiches. And she wrote it on this paper and put it up that she was certified. And I said, oh. And the boy said, told you. No, I'm not certified. So I thought, okay, well, we got our sandwiches. We sat there and ate. Altogether, I'd say that probably took us maybe 10, 15 minutes. I don't know exactly. So then we went on down the road, and I still had to get gasoline. I found a place that had pumps. Got out, filled my tank, and went in. I gave the guy a credit card, and he said, oh, I can't do that. I said, why? I said, it's good. You could call the company, and, it's good. He said, no, it's not that. He says, I just got my new machine, and I don't know how to work it. I said, oh, well, at that time, it was one of these metal things that you put the card in, and you put the paper over it, and then you run it back and forth. And I said, well, I said, we use one with my husband's paintings and things, so I'll show you how to use it. So I showed him how to use it. He says, well, what do you know? He said, I can do that. So I paid for my gasoline. That took us another, 10 or 15 minutes getting all that settled. Anyway, we would say, and this is, like I said, it's a guesstimate. I'm not sure of the time. But I'd say, let's say it took us maybe 40 minutes to get up toward where we were going. And in front of us was a semi, and it was stopped. In front of him were two other cars, and they were stopped. Well, because of the semi, we couldn't see what was going on. Well, there were no cell phones in that day and age, and you young people, I know they find that hard to believe, but there were no such things as cell phones. The only communication we had was to get out and ask somebody or use our CD. We had a CD. And we asked the guy in the semi what was wrong. I said, what's going on? He said, we're waiting on the Indian coroner. And I said, coroner? What? Indian coroner? What? He said, well, we're on the Indian reservation, and the regular coroner for this county can't come in on the reservation. They have to have their own coroner. I said, that's not what I was asking. Why a coroner? He said, well, about 40 minutes ago, a drunk came around the corner there driving and hit a woman head on and decapitated her. Now, people, I don't know about you, but I am sure that God was on our side. He was watching us. And I looked in my Bible, and it says in plain English that if you are, let me see, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it because I can't remember everything. He says, Psalm 91:9 for thee in all ways. I really believe that there were angels saving us. God had something for us to do. And He's been watching over us all this time. Now, I've gone a little long, and I'm sorry, but I'd like to have you stand for my final prayer, and we'll say goodbye. As I said, this was my testimony. He's alive. My God's alive. Do I have a picture that will show it? Did they tell me? Have I seen Him? Or do I somehow just know it? I wasn't there when He arose or when He rolled the stone away. But I see His wonders and miracles in my life every day. I see His handprints on the countryside. I feel His love when someone's born. I see His face in every sunrise, and He blesses every morn. Yes, I know my God's alive. I shall shout it across the nation. He's my courage. He's my safety. He's my pathway to salvation. Amen. Thank you for listening. You're excused.
Georgia chose the song, so our last song today is Amazing Grace.
And it is.
What she has shared with us, God's grace on her life.
And it was very much so.
I'm gonna go.